Breathe in slowly. Now let your eyes close, and let your body rest. You are safe here, listening, drifting. Tonight we travel together, not across space, but across time. Time far older than history books. Time before nations, before names, before memory. We travel into shadow. Into the heartbeat of the ancient world. And what guides us, what pulls us, what whispers to us, is blood. Blood, the first mystery. Blood, the unbroken thread. It is the liquid of life, pulsing beneath the skin. It is the color of birth, and of death. It stains soil, stone, and story alike. To the ancients, blood was never only blood. It was a bridge. A key. An offering. In every age, in every land, humanity has turned to blood to speak to the divine. To pour it out upon the ground. To raise it to the sky. To spill it in firelight, in secrecy, in ceremony. For blood was thought to hold more than life. It carried the soul. The memory of ancestors. The essence of gods. To spill blood was to release power. To receive blood was to take it in. And so, through millennia, rituals were woven from crimson threads. Rituals of gratitude. Rituals of desperation. Rituals of terror. And though the temples have fallen, though the voices of priests and priestesses are silent, the echoes remain. You can still hear them, if you listen. In the wind, in the soil, in the beating of your own heart. The first drum was the human heart. The first rhythm was blood flowing. And the first prayer was an offering of life. As we wander deeper into this story, you may feel a strange pull. A sense of unease, balanced with calm. For the tale is both sacred and unsettling. Both holy, and haunting. Let that tension hold you. Let it carry you, as a river carries a boat. Tonight, we will walk through caves where ochre dust glows like blood. We will step into temples where kings bleed for eternity. We will stand beneath pyramids where the sun itself was fed with hearts. We will listen to the rituals of blood. Each culture, each age, each people, different, and yet the same. All seeking to survive. All seeking to connect with forces beyond themselves. And all finding in blood, the most powerful offering of all. So rest easy now. Do not resist the imagery. Do not resist the shadows. Drift with me. As the world of today slips away. And the world of yesterday awakens. The fire is lit. The drums are sounding. The night is ready. We begin, at the dawn of sacrifice. Long before the names of gods were spoken, long before temples rose from the earth, there were people gathered in the shadows. They sat close to the fire. Its light flickered across stone walls. Its warmth pushed against the deep cold of the night. And in their hands, they carried something more precious than food, more valuable than stone. They carried blood. To us, it is only a fluid, invisible beneath the skin, rushing silently through our bodies. But to them, it was a mystery. When a wound opened, they saw life pour out. When the blood left, so too did strength, breath, motion. The lesson was clear. Blood was life itself. And so, in those earliest days, they began to wonder. If blood is life, what happens when it is given away? If spilled, if poured, if offered, does it feed the earth? Does it speak to something unseen? Does it barter with death itself? In caves scattered across Europe, across Africa, across the first human landscapes, archaeologists have found traces of this belief. Graves dusted in red ochre, the iron pigment, the color of blood. Bodies curled in fetal position, surrounded by bones of animals. Stone tools resting beside them, as if to guide them on a journey. The red powder was not random. It was ritual. To cover the dead with blood's imitation was to paint them with new life. To cloak them in eternity. The ochre was both symbol and prayer. You are not gone. You are reborn. Imagine the scene. A small tribe, silent as a body, is laid in the earth. The fire crackles. The air is cold. A hunter kneels, sprinkling the crimson dust. Each handful falls like liquid flame. And with every gesture, the tribe whispers to the unknown. In these moments, death was not final. It was a doorway. And blood, real or symbolic, was the key to opening it. But not only in death did blood matter. In life, too, it was sacred. When the hunt succeeded, when an animal was killed, blood was often shared with the earth. A few drops poured into soil. A few drops smeared upon stone. An offering of gratitude. They knew survival was fragile. Each hunt could fail. Each season could starve them. To spill blood was to say thank you. To acknowledge the invisible balance between life taken and life sustained. Listen closely, and you can almost hear them. The rhythm of hands striking drums stretched with animal hide. The chanting, low and repetitive. The crackling of the fire as it throws sparks into the night sky. The hunters stand in a circle, hands still stained from the kill. One cuts his palm, letting a single drop fall to the earth. He whispers into the darkness. Take this. Remember us. Feed us. The earth drinks. The tribe breathes easier. Life continues. In this way, blood became the first language between humans and the unseen world. It was not yet about gods with names, nor about temples of stone. It was about survival. It was about fear. And it was about hope. Consider this. In every culture that came after, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman, Aztec, Norse, the theme repeats. Offer blood, and the gods will listen. Withhold blood, and the gods turn away. The idea is older than myth. Older than writing. Older, perhaps, than memory itself. We call it sacrifice. But to them, it was necessity. Sometimes, the offerings were small. A cut finger. A drop of animal blood. A painted symbol upon stone. Sometimes, they were greater. The body of a prized animal, its blood flowing into the ground. Or in whispers, though evidence is faint, though shadows conceal the truth, perhaps even human life. A child. A captive. A member of the tribe, chosen or given, to carry their people's fear into the next world. Whether or not these darker sacrifices were real, one thing is certain: blood was not wasted. To spill it without purpose was to invite danger. To spill it with intention was to invite blessing. And so, the circle of ritual widened. From graves, to hunts, to celebrations of birth and coming of age. A cut upon the skin. A scar left behind as proof of the offering. A reminder etched into flesh that life is borrowed, and can always be returned. We may never know the exact words spoken around those fires. We may never know the exact prayers whispered to the night. But in the ochre, in the bones, in the silent evidence of prehistory, we glimpse their truth. Blood was the first gift. And sacrifice, the first ritual. Listen again, in your mind. The cave is dark, but the fire glows. The tribe gathers, their faces painted with red. They lift their hands to the smoke-filled ceiling, and they chant, not in words we understand, but in sounds as old as humanity itself. The sound rises, falls, rises again. A heartbeat. A river. A pulse. And with it, blood flows into the soil, binding life to earth, earth to sky, sky to mystery. This is where it began. The dawn of sacrifice. The first recognition that blood holds meaning beyond the body. That in its color, in its warmth, in its fleeting flow, there is something eternal. And as they sat in those caves, as they buried their dead in crimson dust, as they poured blood upon the soil, they unknowingly set the stage. For every ritual that followed. For every temple. For every prayer. The ancients gave blood to survive. And in doing so, they created a tradition that would never die. The Nile flows. Endless, eternal, like a vein of the earth itself. It carries silt, water, and life through the desert. And for the ancient Egyptians, it carried something more. A rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat of the cosmos. To live in Egypt was to live between opposites, flood and drought, life and death, order and chaos. And what held these forces in balance, was Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, harmony. Without balance, the world would collapse. Without offering, the gods would turn away. And so the Egyptians, masters of ritual, turned to blood. But their rituals were not as raw, not as primal as the fires of prehistory. They were structured. Ordered. Bound in stone, in temple, in scripture. Blood here was both real and symbolic. It was offered, yes, through animals, through prisoners, through enemies brought low in battle. But it was also represented. Red wine poured like lifeblood. Crimson pigments painted across temple walls. The image of sacrifice, controlled and contained. For Egypt, above all, feared chaos. And blood, if spilled carelessly, was chaos incarnate. The myths tell us this. From the blood of Isis, healing magic was born. From the blood of Ra, serpents were created. Blood was power. Dangerous, unpredictable, divine. Yet the pharaoh himself was seen as the vessel of sacred blood. His veins carried the essence of the gods. His heart was the center of cosmic order. To harm him was to harm Ma'at itself. And so, offerings were made in his name. Bulls, sacred animals, slaughtered in great rituals. Their throats cut, their blood flowing into basins of alabaster. Priests caught the liquid, sprinkled it upon altars, poured it into the earth. The act was not brutal. It was precise. It was ceremonial. Blood was measured, controlled, directed like a river into the hands of gods. But darker whispers exist. In times of crisis, famine, plague, war, it is said that human lives were given. Captives from foreign lands. Enemies of the throne. Their blood spilled in shadowed chambers, unseen by the masses, known only to the priests. The gods of Egypt were not always gentle. They were fierce. They were hungry. And they demanded balance. Think of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war. The myths tell that once, in her fury, she nearly destroyed all of humanity. She drank blood in rivers, insatiable, relentless. Only by trickery was she stopped. Red beer, dyed to resemble blood, was poured out upon the ground. She drank, she grew drunk, and humanity was spared. Even in myth, the Egyptians could not escape the idea. Blood draws the gods. Blood awakens their power. Step now, in your mind, into a temple at Karnak. The columns rise like stone papyrus stalks, painted in colors faded by time. The air is cool, the shadows long. At the altar, priests stand in linen robes, their heads shaved, their faces solemn. They lift a vessel carved of alabaster. Within it, blood darkens, steaming faintly in the morning air. They chant. The words echo through the hypostyle hall. Slow. Rhythmic. Measured, like the flow of the Nile. The blood is poured. First upon the altar. Then upon the ground. Then upon the statues of the gods. Each gesture is precise. Each drop is purposeful. Chaos is held back. Ma'at is restored. For the Egyptians believed that gods must be fed. Not as mortals are fed, with bread or meat, but with essence. With power. With blood. And so, through ritual, they bound themselves to eternity. The same way they bound the body in linen wrappings, they bound the cosmos in order. Nothing wasted. Nothing uncontrolled. every gesture serving the endless balance. Yet beneath the order, beneath the stone, beneath the careful hands of priests, there was always unease. Blood was life, but also death. To spill it was sacred, but also dangerous. And perhaps that is why so much of Egyptian sacrifice was symbolic. Why red wine became the blood of Osiris. Why clay figurines stood in place of human victims. They had learned, perhaps more than any other culture, to fear chaos. To fear the unending hunger of the divine. Still, echoes remain. In fragments of text, in temple reliefs, in the memory of battles fought and captives taken. Sacrifice did not vanish. It was hidden. Masked by symbol. Shrouded by secrecy. Imagine, for a moment, the festival of the Nile. Crowds gather along the riverbanks. The water rises, flooding fields, promising harvest. Priests cast offerings into the water, flowers, food, gold. And perhaps, a living body, bound and weighted, sinking beneath the current. The Nile accepts. The people cheer. The cycle continues. To the Egyptians, eternity was not an abstract dream. It was a daily rhythm. Life, death, rebirth. The sun rose, the sun set. The river flooded, the river withdrew. Kings lived, kings died, kings lived again in stone and story. Blood flowed through it all. Not always visible. Not always spoken of. But always present. Always essential. And so, when we think of Egypt, we think of pyramids. Of mummies. Of golden masks gleaming in the dark. But beneath it all, beneath the stone, beneath the sand, there is blood. The blood of animals. The blood of enemies. The blood of kings. It stained their altars. It colored their myths. It bound their people to gods that could never be satisfied, only appeased. Blood for eternity. Blood for balance. Blood for the endless river of time. Close your eyes. Imagine the Nile at night, silver beneath the moon. Imagine the temple walls, echoing with chants. Imagine the vessel lifted high, crimson spilling like a second river into the dark. This was Egypt. This was their truth. And this was their offering. Blood, for the gods of eternity. Between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the world's first cities were born. Clay rose into walls. Reeds bent into huts. And temples, high and solemn, stretched toward the heavens. Here, in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, humanity spoke its first written prayers. And in those prayers, in those rituals, in those myths, one substance was always present. Blood. To the Sumerians, to the Akkadians, to the Babylonians, blood was not just life. It was origin. It was the very breath of humanity. Listen to their creation story. In the beginning, the gods themselves were burdened. They labored to build the world. They dug the rivers, raised the mountains, tilled the soil. But they grew weary. They longed for relief. And so they made a plan. They would create a new race, a servant race, to carry their burdens. They would shape them from clay. But clay alone was not enough. Clay was silent. Clay was lifeless. Clay had no will, no strength, no breath. So the gods took blood from one of their own, a god slain in sacrifice, and they mixed it with the clay. And from that mingling, humanity was born. From the very beginning, blood defined us. Our flesh was earth. But our spirit, our motion, our power, came from blood. It was divine. It was dangerous. And it was forever linked to sacrifice. In the temples of Mesopotamia, priests and priestesses remembered this truth. They knew the gods hungered, not as mortals do, but for essence. For blood, for breath, for the life that only sacrifice could release. Animals were offered, sheep, goats, cattle. Their throats cut. Their blood caught in bowls of bronze. The liquid poured upon the altars. The smoke rising to the heavens. But the offerings did not always stop with animals. In times of crisis, darker rituals emerged. Whispers tell of humans given to the fire. Of captives slain, their blood smeared on temple walls. Of kings, desperate to please the gods, offering even their own sons. The gods demanded life. And so life was given. Picture, if you will, the ziggurat, a massive, terraced temple rising above the plain. At its summit, priests gather in white robes. The sky is heavy with clouds. A storm approaches. They fear the wrath of Adad, god of thunder. They fear his bolts will strike their fields, their homes, their city. And so, they prepare an offering. A bull, its horns gilded, its body adorned with garlands, is led to the altar. Its eyes roll, its breath steams in the air. A priest lifts a blade, sharp as obsidian. A prayer is whispered. The blade falls. Blood flows, hot and red, into the waiting bowl. The priest dips his hand, smearing the altar, smearing his own face. The crowd watches in silence. The storm breaks. Lightning cracks across the sky. Thunder shakes the earth. And in that moment, they believe, they know, that the God has heard them. That the God has fed. That the God has spared them. For in Mesopotamia, sacrifice was never just a gesture. It was survival. Without offerings, the rivers might not flood. The crops might wither. The storms might destroy. With offerings, balance could be restored. With blood, the gods could be appeased. This belief shaped their lives, their laws, their very cities. Kings were seen not only as rulers, but as high priests, mediators between humans and gods. Their duty was to ensure the rituals were performed, the offerings given, the balance preserved. And when kings conquered new lands, they often dedicated their victories with blood. Enemies captured in war were sometimes sacrificed. Their deaths became symbols of power. Their blood became offerings to the gods of conquest. But blood was not only poured upon altars. It was also written into contracts, into bonds, into oaths. Just as the gods had bound humanity with blood, so too did men bind themselves. A cut upon the skin. Blood mingled between two hands. An unbreakable promise. To break such an oath was to invite divine wrath. To betray not only a man, but a god. And so, across the plains of Mesopotamia, blood became law. Blood became justice. Blood became the very breath of gods and men alike. Close your eyes now. Picture the torchlight flickering in a temple chamber. Hear the chanting rise and fall, voices echoing against stone. Smell the smoke of burning fat, the iron scent of fresh blood. A priest lifts a vessel high. Blood darkens his hands, his robes. His eyes close. His lips move in prayer. With this blood, may the god awaken. With this blood, may the god be fed. With this blood, may the city survive. Outside, the people wait. Their lives, their hopes, their fears, rest upon this offering. For if the gods accept, they will live. If the gods reject, they will die. This was Mesopotamia. A land of rivers. A land of clay. A land where blood was more than life, it was destiny. And even now, though the ziggurats crumble, though the temples are buried in dust, their myths remain. Myths that whisper to us still. You were made from clay. You were given blood. You were born of sacrifice. And therefore, you are bound. Bound to gods long silent. Bound to rituals long forgotten. Bound to the truth that without blood, nothing endures. Mesopotamia knew this. They lived it. They died by it. For them, blood was not just the breath of gods. It was the very breath of the world. The world shifts again. From the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, we move westward. Across the Mediterranean waters, where marble columns rise against blue skies. And where the names of gods echo in every valley, every stone, every heart. Greece. And later, Rome. Two civilizations bound together, not only by conquest and philosophy, but by a shared reverence for blood. Yet here, sacrifice was not merely survival. It was spectacle. It was devotion. It was glory. In Greece, the gods of Olympus ruled with human passions. They loved, they lusted, they quarreled, they raged. They demanded offerings not only to sustain themselves, but to honor their pride, their dominion, their power. The Greeks knew the gods could be jealous, vengeful, unpredictable. A storm from Poseidon might shatter a fleet. A plague from Apollo might sweep through the city. Zeus might hurl thunder upon a land left unoffered. So the Greeks gave blood. At altars of stone, animals were led, bulls, rams, goats. Their horns adorned with garlands, their bodies washed in water. Their foreheads sprinkled with barley. The community gathered. The priests raised their blades. And with solemn chants, the animal's throat was opened. Its blood spilled upon the earth, upon the fire. The smoke rose, thick and pungent, into the heavens. The people prayed as the scent ascended, believing it reached Olympus itself. But not all sacrifices were equal. Some demanded more. When Agamemnon sought to sail for Troy, the winds refused to carry his fleet. The goddess Artemis, angered, withheld the breeze. And so a choice was made. A terrible choice. A daughter's life, Iphigenia, promised as offering. Her blood, it was said, would appease the goddess. Her death would purchase the winds. And so the girl was led to the altar. The knife raised. The prayer spoken. The offering made. History blurs the line between myth and fact. But the story lingers, a shadow on the Greek soul. That human blood, at times, was the only gift great enough to move the gods. Beyond public sacrifice, there were the hidden rites. The mysteries of Eleusis, the cults of Dionysus, the oracles of Apollo. In dim caverns and torchlit groves, initiates gathered. They drank potions, sang hymns, and sometimes cut themselves, spilling drops of their own blood as tokens of loyalty. For blood was not only an offering outward. It was also a seal inward. A vow. A transformation. Through blood, the worshipper was bound to the god. Their body a vessel of divine ecstasy or madness. The Greeks saw blood as bridge and currency both. A path between mortal and divine. And then came Rome. A city born in violence. A people hardened by conquest. If Greece offered blood to the gods in solemn reverence, Rome gave it also to the people. As entertainment, as spectacle, as proof of empire's might. Step into the Colosseum. Hear the roar of 50,000 voices. The sun blazes above. Sand shimmers below. And upon that sand, blood will fall. Gladiators enter. Men sworn by oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorium. To fight, to endure, to kill, and to die. Their very oath was a blood oath, a pact of life for glory. Steel clashes. Shields splinter. The crowd gasps as blood sprays across the arena. Every death, every wound, becomes a ritual of Rome. A reminder that power is purchased with sacrifice. For Rome, the amphitheater was temple. The emperor its high priest. The games themselves offerings to gods, spirits, and ancestors alike. But it was not only men who bled for Rome. Animals by the thousands, lions, elephants, bears, brought from conquered lands, were slain in ritual hunts. Exotic blood spilled into the sand. each drop proclaiming Rome's dominion over nature, over earth, over all. Even prisoners, rebels, and traitors were sacrificed. Their executions staged as grand performances. Some burned alive as living torches. Others nailed to crosses as public warnings. Their blood, their agony, became fuel for Rome's unyielding machine. Yet Rome, like Greece, never forgot the sacred side of sacrifice. In temples to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Saturn, priests carried out rituals of blood. The most famous, the October horse. Each autumn, a horse was sacrificed to Mars, god of war. Its blood and entrails carried in procession, fought over by rival factions of the city. For possession of this sacred flesh was thought to bring fortune. In spring, during the festival of Lupercalia, young men struck citizens with strips of sacrificial goat hide. The blood still wet upon them. Believed to purify, to bless, to ensure fertility. To bleed was to be renewed. To be touched by blood was to be sanctified. For Rome, blood was woven into every act of state. Treaties sealed with sacrifice. Oaths sworn upon altars dripping red. Victories celebrated with offerings of captives. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he invoked Mars. And blood followed him into Rome itself. When emperors rose to power, they sacrificed to the gods. Their right to rule confirmed not only by senate and sword, but by the flow of blood at the altar. Blood gave them legitimacy. Blood gave them destiny. Blood gave them empire. But time changes all things. As centuries passed, new faiths rose. Faiths that condemned the spilling of blood. That spoke of a single sacrifice, once and for all. Yet the memory of Greece and Rome lingers. In myths, in ruins, in stories told by firelight. Stories of gods who demanded life. Stories of emperors who fed their people not only bread, but blood. Close your eyes. Imagine the amphitheater once more. Hear the chants rise with the morning sun. See the sword lifted high, dripping red. Blood darkens the sand. The gods are honored. The crowd is fed. And glory, in Greece and Rome, is written in blood. The air grows thin. The ground rises beneath us. And suddenly we are high upon a plateau, surrounded by mountains crowned with clouds. The city spreads before us, vast, shimmering, alive. Tenochtitlan, the city of the Aztecs. A place where stone temples rise like mountains of their own. Painted with bright pigments, adorned with feathers and gold. But beneath the color, there is red. Always red. For here, the blood of men and women is more than offering. It is necessity. For the Aztecs believed, without sacrifice, the sun would falter. Without sacrifice, the world would end. To understand the Aztecs is to step into their cosmos. A universe born not in peace, but in conflict. 5 ages of creation, they said. Each destroyed in cataclysm, each remade anew. And in this, the 5th age, the gods themselves had given their own blood, their own lives, to set the sun in motion. They had thrown themselves into the fire, surrendering their essence, so that light could return to the sky. But such a sacrifice came at a cost. The sun, born of blood, demanded more blood to survive. A living star, hungry for the hearts of men. And so the Aztecs became the keepers of the sun. Guardians who fed it with crimson life. High upon the great pyramid of Tenochtitlan, the temple of Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, stood as the center of sacrifice. Its steps, steep and narrow, climbed toward the sky like a stairway to the divine. Prisoners, captured in war, were led up these steps. Their bodies painted, their faces daubed with chalk. Drums thundered. Conch shells wailed. The crowd below waited, breathless. Upon the altar, the priest, adorned in feathers, gold, and jaguar pelts, raised a blade of obsidian, sharp as glass. And with a swift strike, he opened the chest, pulled forth the heart, still beating, still trembling in his hands. The blood poured down the steps. The heart lifted to the sky. The sun, above, was fed. The world, for another day, endured. To us, it seems horrific. But to the Aztecs, it was sacred. Without such rituals, they believed, darkness would consume all. The sky would collapse. The stars would fall. Life itself would unravel. But where would the blood come from? How to feed a hungry god who demanded life unending? Thus was born the Flower War. Not war for conquest. Not war for territory. But war for bodies. For captives. For sacrifice. Armies clashed with obsidian blades and wooden clubs. Not to kill outright, but to wound, to disable, to capture. The prisoner was the true prize. For each captive was a future offering. Each captive was a beating heart for the sun. And so war became ritual. A theater of combat. A harvest of blood. The Aztec calendar was rich with feasts and rituals. Each one accompanied by sacrifice. During Tlacaxipulistli, the festival of the flayed god Xipe-Totec, victims were skinned, their hides worn by priests and warriors, as symbols of renewal, of life reborn from death. At the feast of Toxcatl, a young man chosen to embody the god Tezcatlipoca lived as the deity for a year, clothed in riches, honored with reverence. And at the end of that year, he was led to the altar, sacrificed, his body broken, his blood spilled, A living God returned to the heavens. In every season, in every festival, the pulse of life was measured in sacrifice. The gods were fed. The city was secured. The cosmos was held in balance. Some chronicles, written by shocked Spanish conquistadors, speak of thousands sacrificed in a single day. Rows of prisoners led to the steps. Drums beating without end. Hearts cast into baskets. Bodies tumbling down the pyramid sides, to be gathered below. Historians debate the numbers. Were they exaggerated, woven into propaganda to demonize the conquered people? Or were they, perhaps, true? If even half of what was written is real, then rivers of blood once flowed through Tenochtitlan. Imagine standing there. The heat of the sun. The endless chant of priests. The scent of blood thick in the air. And knowing. For the Aztecs, this was not cruelty. It was salvation. A duty. A gift to the god who carried the sun. What makes the Aztec rituals haunting is their paradox. For this was a culture of immense beauty. Their poetry sang of flowers, of jade, of fleeting life. Their art dazzled with color, symmetry, and grace. Their cities, vast and gleaming, rivaled any in Europe. And yet, beneath the poetry and color, beat the drum of sacrifice. A rhythm that never stopped. A reminder that beauty, too, was fragile. That even the sun itself could vanish without blood. And then came strangers across the sea. Steel-clad men with guns and horses. Led by Hernán Cortés. At first, the Aztecs thought them gods returned. But soon, the truth of conquest unfolded. The Spaniards looked upon the temples, the altars, the sacrifices, and recoiled in horror. To them, this was barbarity. Proof of devilry. Reason enough to destroy. And so, with war and disease, the empire fell. The great temples were torn down. The altars desecrated. The drums silenced. The sun, once fed with rivers of blood, was left to burn without offering. Yet still, the memory lingers. In ruins that rise from the earth. In codices that whisper the old songs. In stories told at dusk. Of a people who gave their lives to keep the heavens alive. Close your eyes. Hear the drums. Smell the incense. See the priest raise a heart toward the blazing sky. For the Aztecs, blood was not death alone. It was creation. It was balance. It was the price of the sun. The jungle whispers. The drums of Tenochtitlan fade, and in their place, the sound of insects, of birds, of leaves heavy with rain. We step deeper. Through tangled vines and ceiba trees. And there, hidden in the green, rise the stone cities of the Maya. Steep pyramids piercing the canopy. Palaces etched with glyphs. Temples aligned with stars. Silent now, but once alive with chants and fire. With blood spilled not for conquest, but for prophecy, for kingship, for communion with the gods. The Maya were astronomers, mathematicians, scribes of the sky. They charted the planets with precision, predicted eclipses, measured the great cycles of time. Their calendar was not mere record. It was destiny. Each day infused with meaning. Each number carrying divine weight. And at the heart of this cosmic system lay sacrifice. For the Maya believed that blood, the vital essence, was the fuel that bound humans to gods, earth to heaven, time to eternity. Unlike the Aztecs, who fed the sun with captives, the Maya placed the burden of sacrifice upon their rulers. The king was no mere sovereign. He was the axis of the world, a living bridge between heaven and earth. And his blood was the holiest of offerings. On sacred days, upon the steps of the temple, the king would pierce his flesh. His tongue, drawn through with thorns of stingray spine. His ears cut with blades of obsidian. Even his genitals pierced. The blood caught on bark paper, burned so its smoke could rise to the gods. The queen, too, joined the ritual. Through her blood, the lineage of kings was sanctified. The future of the dynasty secured. The pain was immense. But the suffering itself was sacred. A demonstration of devotion. A doorway to vision. For the Maya believed that bloodletting opened the veil of the world. That pain and loss of blood summoned visions. Kings and queens would fall into trance. The smoke of burning blood. The rhythm of drums. The sting of agony. All joined to call forth ancestral spirits. Serpents of the otherworld. God stepping down from the sky. On the carved stone panels of Yaxchilan, we see it still. Lady Zook, queen of the city, kneeling in bloodletting, drawing thorns through her tongue. From the smoke above her, a visioned serpent appears. Its jaws open, its mouth birthing an ancestor. Clad in armor, bearing weapons of power. This was no theater. It was revelation. The king, the queen, the prophets. Through their blood, the gods revealed their will. And yet, as with all ancient peoples, captives also fed the rites. Warriors taken in battle were not killed immediately. They were kept, displayed, honored. Then sacrificed upon the pyramids. At Copan, at Tikal, at Palenque. Captives were decapitated. Their skulls placed in racks. Some were thrown into the deep cenotes of Chichen Itza. Their bodies swallowed by the water. Their blood mingling with the sacred depths. Offered to Chak, god of rain. Here, the blood of kings and the blood of captives wove together into one tapestry. The mighty gave of themselves. The conquered gave of their lives. And through both, the gods were appeased. The Maya ball game, played with a heavy rubber ball on stone courts, was more than sport. It was ritual. A reenactment of cosmic myth. The story of the hero twins, who descended into the underworld to play against the lords of death. For the Maya, the outcome of the game could be destiny. In some ceremonies, the losing team, or at times, the winners themselves, were sacrificed, their blood shed as tribute. The court was thus not a place of play alone, but a stage of death and renewal. The ball bounced. The crowd roared. And fate hung on every strike. The Maya world was ruled by prophecy. Every cartoon, every Bacton, marked with omens. Sacrifices kept the cycle turning, ensured that the gods were honored, that the stars would not fall from the sky. But prophecy also carried shadows. The Maya believed that neglect, that failure to bleed, would invite chaos. The rain would cease. The maize would wither. The sun itself might abandon them. Thus blood was not only gift. It was insurance. The very fabric that held the cosmos together. And yet, as centuries passed, cities crumbled. Temples were swallowed by vines. The jungle grew silent once more. Historians debate the cause. Drought, famine, war, rebellion. Perhaps the gods had demanded more blood than men could give. Perhaps the rituals, once sacred, could no longer sustain the people. When the Spaniards came, they found ruins already fallen, cities abandoned. Yet rituals still whispered in the shadows of the forest. The sacred ballgame still played. The cenotes still fed. The king still bleeding. Though their dynasties waned, the blood of the Maya never ceased entirely. It faded, but never vanished. Close your eyes now. The jungle hums around you. You hear the rustle of leaves, the drip of rain from stone. And in the temple above, a king draws thorns through his tongue. A queen burns paper soaked in blood. The smoke rises. A serpent forms. And the gods lean close. Listening. Demanding. Feeding on the blood of kings and prophets. The canopy shifts. From the steaming jungles of Central America to the cool, damp forests of Europe. The air smells of moss, oak, and rain. Mist clings to the trees. Ravens stir in the branches above. And here, in the shadows of the woods, beneath circles of standing stone, in clearings where the oak reigns supreme, the Celts gathered, guided by their priests, the Druids. keepers of memory, prophecy, and ritual. Masters of sacrifice. To the Celts, the natural world was alive with spirits. Every tree, every stream, every rock and glade held its own power. But the oak was the king of trees. Strong, vast, enduring. Lightning struck it more than any other, a sign of its link to the heavens. And in its branches grew mistletoe, rare and sacred, believed to heal sickness, to protect against curses, to ensure fertility of land and people alike. Harvesting mistletoe was no ordinary task. The Druids would climb the tree in white robes, cut it with a golden sickle, catch it before it touched the ground. Below, a sacrifice was made. A bull, sometimes more. Its blood feeding the earth. As the sacred plant was gathered. Here, already, we see the pattern. Blood, life, sacrifice. Woven into the rhythms of Celtic belief. The Druids were more than priests. They were judges, historians, healers, astronomers. They carried the memory of the people. The sacred lore never written, passed instead from tongue to ear, through endless generations. And among their duties lay sacrifice, offerings to the many gods, to Tyrannes, god of thunder and sky, to Tutates, protector of tribe and war, to Asus, mysterious, dark, associated with rivers and trees. Each god demanded a different gift. Some called for animals, some for food, drink, treasure, and some demanded human blood. The Romans, who fought the Celts, wrote of these sacrifices with fascination and horror. They told of men bound, throats cut in sacred groves, of warriors drowned in rivers, given to the gods of water, of victims burned alive, their cries rising with the smoke, their souls offered to the divine. And perhaps most chilling of all, the wicker man. A great effigy, woven of reeds and branches. Inside, prisoners, captives, criminals. The structure set alight. Flames leaping high. The bodies consumed. The blood and spirit offered to the gods. Did this happen as the Romans described? Some debate remains. But the stories persist. And the fires of the wicker man still burn in our imagination. As with the Maya, the Celts bound their kings to sacrifice. For the king was not just ruler, but the land itself. His fortune was the tribe's fortune. His health, the tribe's health. His failure, the tribe's downfall. In times of famine, disaster, or defeat, the king himself might be sacrificed, cut down, buried, or drowned, to renew the bond with the gods, to cleanse the people of ill fortune. This grim echo appears in Celtic myth, where kings are slain to restore balance, where sovereignty itself is both bride and executioner. And still today, the earth gives us proof. Across Ireland, Denmark, England, archaeologists have found bodies preserved in peat bogs. Their skin tanned like leather. Their faces still bearing the marks of death. Some were strangled. Cords tied tight around their necks. Some stabbed. Some drowned. Some suffered what scholars call the triple death. Strangled, stabbed, and drowned in one rite. Their bodies laid gently in the bog. Offerings sealed in water and earth. Tolland man, Grobel man, old Croghan man. Their faces, still peaceful, seem to sleep beneath the centuries. But their silence whispers of ritual, of sacrifice beneath the sacred oak. The Druids were also seers. Through blood, they sought visions. The life draining from a victim. The pattern of its death. The movements of entrails and smoke. All were read as messages from the gods. In this way, the blood of sacrifice was not only offering, but oracle. A language spoken in pain and death. A script written in red. The tribe would listen. Wait for the words of the Druids. And shape their fates by what was revealed. When Rome advanced into Gaul and Britain, they clashed not only with Celtic warriors, but with Celtic faith. Julius Caesar himself recorded the rites of the Druids. He condemned the blood sacrifices, called them barbaric. And yet, he knew their power. For Rome feared the Druids. Not just their rituals, but their influence. They bound the tribes together. They gave warriors courage. Gave kings legitimacy. Gave people faith that their blood fed the gods. And so Rome outlawed them. Cut down their groves. Burned their idols. Killed their priests. But the memory did not die. The sacred oak remained. The stones of Stonehenge still stood. The whispers of blood in the forest never fully faded. Long after the Druids vanished, echoes of their rites lingered. In tales of fairy mounds, where offerings were left. In midsummer fires, where effigies burned. In whispered stories of kings who must die, so the land may live. These echoes, faint though they are, remind us that sacrifice was not mere savagery. It was belief. It was duty. It was the binding of tribe to cosmos. Man to God. Life to death. Listen now. The forest is still. Mist hangs low between the trees. A circle of stones rises from the earth. You hear chanting. You smell smoke. A figure in white lifts a sickle of gold. Mistletoe falls. A bull bellows its last. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a wicker figure creaks in the firelight, waiting to burn. Blood beneath the sacred oaks. the offering of tribe, king, and captive. The whispers of druids. Fading, but never gone. The wind howls. The sea crashes. The sky is iron gray, heavy with storms. From the forests of the Celts, we sail northward, into the world of the Vikings. Raiders, explorers, traders, poets. Masters of the longship. Servants of the gods. Here, blood runs like mead in the feasting halls. Here, sacrifice is not memory, but oath, bargain, and destiny. The Norse gods were not distant, but deeply woven into human life. They fought, feasted, schemed, and bled, just as men did. Odin, the All-Father, the one-eyed wanderer, seeker of wisdom, god of war and death. He drank from the well of Mimir, trading an eye for knowledge. He hung himself on the world tree, Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, sacrificing himself to himself, to gain the runes of magic. Thor, red-bearded thunderer, protector of men, killer of giants. His hammer, Mjolnir, struck down foes, and hallowed sacred rites. Frey and Freya, gods of fertility, love, and fate. Balder the Beautiful, fated to fall. Loki the Trickster, forever shifting, deceiving, betraying. To these gods, men gave blood. Animal, human, their own. The central ritual of Norse religion was the blot. Literally, sacrifice. It could be small, a simple offering of food, drink, or livestock, or vast, a communal rite of blood and feasting. Animals, horses, goats, cattle, swine, were slaughtered. Their blood collected in great bowls, sprinkled upon altars, idols, worshippers alike, with bundles of twigs called horgr. The meat roasted, shared in sacred feast between God and man. But sometimes, blood of animals was not enough. For Odin, the All-Father, hungering for wisdom and war, human sacrifice was demanded. Odin was the god of the gallows. The hanged, the strangled, the sacrificed. All were his. Prisoners of war. Slaves, outcasts. Bound and strung from trees. Their last breath given to him. Some were pierced with spears, mirroring Odin's own sacrifice upon the world tree. The symmetry was clear. As he gave himself to himself, so men gave others to him. The hanged swayed in the northern wind. Souls carried to Valhalla, to the halls of the slain. The most infamous of Viking sacrifices was said to take place at Uppsala, in what is now Sweden. The historian Adam of Bremen, writing in the 11th century, described a vast temple, golden and magnificent. Every 9 years, a great festival was held. 9 of every kind of creature, horse, dog, man, were offered to the gods. The bodies were hung in a sacred grove. A ghastly display of devotion. Blood soaked the soil. The air heavy with death and incense. Whether Adam's account is exact or exaggerated, the idea rings true. The Vikings did not shy from blood. For them, sacrifice was not cruelty, but covenant. The Vikings also sent their dead to the afterlife. In ships, real or symbolic. The wealthy and powerful were laid in longships, buried or burned, surrounded by weapons, tools, treasures. And sometimes, not alone. Slaves, concubines, companions were sacrificed at the funeral, killed to accompany the master into the afterlife, to serve him in Valhalla or beyond. Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, in the 10th century, witnessed one such funeral on the Volga. A chieftain was buried with goods and offerings. But a slave girl, chosen to join him, was plied with drink, adorned with jewels, then stabbed and strangled, laid beside her lord. Her blood, her death, part of the passage to the next world. Legends tell of the blood eagle, a grisly execution, half ritual, half punishment. A victim's ribs cut from the spine, lungs pulled outward like wings, dedicated to Odin. A mingling of cruelty, vengeance, and sacrifice. Whether this was truly done, or merely a poetic terror, is debated. But the fact remains. The Vikings sang of it. And in song, sacrifice and spectacle are one. To a Viking warrior, death was not the end, but the gateway. Those who died in battle, chosen by Odin's Valkyries, were carried to Valhalla. There, they feasted, fought by day, drank by night, awaiting Ragnarok, the end of all things. For such a promise, blood was a fair price. And so, before battles, the Vikings made offerings, cutting themselves, smearing weapons with blood, calling upon Odin, Thor, and Freya to grant victory. The spilling of blood was pact and prayer alike. To their Christian enemies, the sacrifices of the Vikings were monstrous. They told tales of wild pagans, drenching altars in blood, offering men to trees, horses to rivers, slaves to fire. But beneath the fear was a truth. The Vikings lived as they worshipped, fiercely, boldly, without fear of death. Blood was the language of the gods, and the Vikings spoke it fluently. With the coming of Christianity, The blot was outlawed. Temples burned. Groves cut down. The hammer replaced by the cross. But echoes remain. In sagas. In stones carved with runes. In whispered tales of Odin's hunger. Even today, when a toast is raised in the north, it is called a blot, a sacrifice of drink, a shadow of blood long gone. Listen. The wind rises. A longship crests the waves. Warriors chant in unison, calling upon Odin. In a grove, a prisoner hangs, swaying in the night wind. In a temple, blood drips upon stone. In a burial mound, a chieftain lies with his slave, bound forever. The gods of the north are watching. And in the cold silence of the fjord, blood for Odin. Blood for the gods of war. The drums beat in the distance. The air is heavy with smoke. And the scent of earth after rain. We leave the stormy seas of the north. And step into the cradle of humanity. Africa, vast, endless. Home to deserts and jungles. Mountains and savannas. Here blood is more than sacrifice. It is communion. A bridge across worlds. In African belief systems, life does not end at the grave. The dead linger. They walk among the living. They watch, protect, punish, guide. The ancestors are the living dead. Neither gone nor forgotten, but present. Woven into daily life. And just as the living require nourishment, so too do the ancestors. Blood is food for the spirit. The spilling of it, a sign of reverence. A gift of life to those beyond life. Unlike the gods of distant pantheons, the ancestors are intimate. They are family. They remember your name. They know your story. And so the blood sacrifice is not impersonal worship, but a covenant, a conversation, a promise between kin. Goats, chickens, cattle, the most precious of wealth, were offered. Their throats slit. Blood caught in bowls. Poured upon the earth. Shared with the ancestors below. It is not destruction. It is sharing. The sacrifice unites the living and the dead. In one circle of belonging. Among the Yoruba of West Africa, ritual sacrifice is central. The Orisha, divine spirits, stand between humans and the Supreme Creator. Each Orisha governs aspects of life. Ogun of iron and war. Shango of thunder and fire. Ocean of rivers and fertility. To feed the Orisha, blood was necessary. Chickens, goats, pigeons, rams. Their blood spilled. Their flesh shared in feast. But every sacrifice was also an offering to the ancestors. Blood spoke both upward to the gods and downward to the dead. A dual current of life and remembrance. The Dogon people of Mali. Keepers of secret cosmologies. Looked to the stars. They believed life began with Namo, primordial beings. Sacrificed to bring order to the cosmos. Rituals reenacted this primal act, where blood, both animal and symbolic, renewed the balance of creation. To the Dogon, sacrifice was not merely local. It echoed across the heavens. Each drop mirrored the sacrifice of the first beings, binding earth to sky. In the great Ashanti kingdom, sacrifice was political as much as spiritual. The king was not only ruler, but custodian of the ancestors' power. At times of war or crisis, blood was shed to secure victory, to cleanse betrayal, to sanctify rule. There are whispers of human offerings, slaves or prisoners of war, given at funerals of kings, their blood accompanying the monarch into the ancestral world. Though rare, such sacrifices carried immense weight. The ultimate gift to ancestors and gods alike. For the Zulu, cattle were life itself. Wealth, power, and survival. Measured in herds. To sacrifice cattle was to offer the very essence of prosperity. The blood, the flesh, shared in great communal rites. The ancestors were invoked, called to drink, to eat, to remain close to their people. When misfortune struck, drought, sickness, defeat, blood sacrifice restored harmony. Not vengeance, but balance. Not terror, but renewal. Across West and Central Africa, secret societies guarded the mysteries of blood. The Poro and Sandy among the men. The leopard societies, feared and revered. Their rituals were hidden in forests, masked in secrecy. Blood offerings bound initiates, sealed oaths, forged unbreakable ties. To enter the society was to die and be reborn. Blood was the marker of passage. It marked the end of childhood, the beginning of true life. Sacrifice in Africa was not cruelty, but necessity. Blood was life force, ash, nyama, ntu. Depending on the people and tongue. A spiritual energy flowing in all things. To spill blood was to release this force. Direct it. Channel it. It healed the sick. It consecrated the soil. It bound warriors before battle. It sanctified new rulers. It was medicine, prayer, memory, and covenant. With the arrival of Islam, and later Christianity, blood rituals were condemned. Sacrifices outlawed. Ancestor veneration denounced. Drums silenced, altars broken. But the rituals endured. Sometimes in secret. sometimes transformed. The goat offered in Eid al-Adha. The fowl buried discreetly at dawn. The libation poured, quietly, at the grave of a parent. Even in the Caribbean and the Americas, where enslaved Africans were torn from their homelands, the sacrifices followed. In Vodou, Santeria, Candomblé, the blood of chickens and goats still feeds the spirits, still honors the ancestors, still binds the living to the dead. Blood in Africa is not about spectacle. It is about continuity. A people's promise to its past. A covenant with the unseen. When the goat bleeds upon the earth. When the chicken's cry fades into silence. When the cattle fall beneath the spear. The ancestors rise. They are fed. They are remembered. They remain. The drums grow louder. A fire blazes. Shadows dance upon the walls of the forest. An elder sprinkles blood upon the soil. Whispers a name. A child is born. And the ancestors smile. The chain is unbroken. The living and the dead. Bound forever. In blood. The air grows thick with incense. The chanting of mantras rises and falls. Like the pulse of the earth itself. A conch shell blows. And before us stands the image of the goddess. Fierce, radiant, terrible, beautiful. She is mother and destroyer. Womb and tomb. She is Kali. She is Durga. She is Shakti. And she hungers for blood. In Hindu thought, the gods and goddesses are not distant figures, but living presences, woven into every aspect of existence. Among them, the goddesses of power. Kali, Durga, Kamunda stand apart. They are fierce protectors, but also destroyers of evil. They carry weapons, stand upon corpses, drink the blood of demons, and as they consume blood in myth, so too do their worshippers. Offer blood in ritual. Blood, in India, is not only life force. It is energy, Shakti. It is what sustains the goddess. And in turn, what she returns to her children as protection. Kali, black-skinned, wild-haired, garlanded with skulls, tongue dripping red. She is fear itself. Yet she is also the mother. Her worshippers call her Ma, mother. They cry to her in desperation. They pour out their fears. They surrender their very lives. And sometimes, they give her blood. At the great festival of Kali Puja, goats and buffaloes are sacrificed. Their throats slit before her image. Blood drips upon the stones. Is offered at her feet. The goddess is fed. The people are blessed. Durga, too, is fierce. Clothed in red. 10-armed and armed with weapons. She rides upon the lion. She is worshipped most vividly at Durga Puja, when her victory over the buffalo demon Mahishasura is celebrated with immense joy. Here, too, the buffalo was sacrificed. The beast that symbolized the demon was slain before the goddess's image, its blood spilled as reenactment, its death sealing the goddess's eternal triumph. Chamunda, one of the most fearsome forms, is depicted gaunt, skeletal, with sunken eyes and blood-stained teeth. She drinks from a skull, dances in cremation grounds, surrounded by spirits of the dead. In her honor, sacrifices of goats, rams, even buffaloes, were common in temples across India. The offering was both appeasement and empowerment. Chamunda's wrath turned to protection when her thirst was quenched. But the blood rituals of India were not merely public sacrifices. They also entered the secret paths of Tantra. Tantric rites, practiced in forests, cremation grounds, in hidden temples, used blood, sometimes even human blood, to invoke the goddess directly. The body was not shunned, but embraced. Blood, semen, flesh, all were sacred substances, portals into the divine. For the tantric devotee, offering blood was not cruelty. It was transformation, the spilling of life force, as a path to ultimate union with Shakti. Beyond the great Sanskrit temples, among tribal groups of eastern and central India, blood sacrifice was woven deeply into life. The Khans of Orissa, for centuries, practiced human sacrifice to the goddess of the earth. Victims were called Mariah. They were revered, cared for, seen not as condemned, but as chosen. When sacrificed, their blood nourished the soil, their flesh sometimes scattered upon the fields. The earth was fed, the harvest ensured. This practice horrified outsiders, and in the 19th century, the British suppressed it with force. Yet its memory lingers, a testament to how far devotion to the goddess could reach. In India, sacrifice was not only cosmic, it was intimate. Families brought goats, chickens, pigeons to local temples. Blood was spilled not for grandeur, but for everyday hopes. Health, fertility, protection, success. A child healed of fever. A crop spared from drought. A soldier protected in battle. The goat's blood was not waste. It was sacred food, shared with the goddess, then shared among the community as prasad. With time, blood sacrifice came under attack. Buddhism and Jainism, with their fierce advocacy of nonviolence, condemned it. Later, reformist Hindu movements sought to abolish it. In many temples, substitutes were offered. Pumpkins split with a sword. Limes pierced with knives. Red hibiscus flowers in place of blood. Yet in some places, the blood still flows. In Kamakya Temple in Assam, where the goddess is worshipped as the womb of creation, animals are still sacrificed. The stones remain stained red. To the outsider, these sacrifices may seem barbaric. But within India, they embody the paradox of the goddess. She is love and terror, gentleness and fury. She creates and destroys. She gives life and demands life in return. The blood spilled at her feet is not meaningless cruelty. It is recognition of her power. It is a covenant of survival. It is the acknowledgement that life and death are bound together. That even in destruction, there is renewal. Even today, in remote villages, in ancient shrines, in hidden corners of cities, the goddess waits. A goat bleats in the courtyard. A drum begins to beat. Priests chant. The blade flashes. Blood spills upon the stones. And for a moment, the veil lifts. The goddess drinks. The people bow. And the circle of life, death, and devotion continues unbroken. The incense thickens. The chanting grows louder. The goddess gazes with unblinking eyes. Her mouth drips red. And still, she smiles. For she is not only destroyer. She is the mother. And in the silence after the sacrifice, her children rest in her embrace. The sky arches above like a vast, eternal canopy. The earth lies steady beneath our feet. Between them, man stands, fragile, fleeting, dependent. To keep the balance between heaven and earth, man offers the only thing that carries the pulse of life itself. Blood. In ancient China, the world was not ruled by men alone. It was ruled by heaven. Heaven gave its blessing to kings and emperors, but only so long as they maintained balance. Floods, famine, rebellion. These were signs that heaven's favor was failing. And to restore it, sacrifice was required. Rituals to honor the gods. Offerings to the spirits. And yes, blood. In Neolithic China, long before the emperors, people carved altars of stone and earth. Here, they offered animals. Oxen, sheep, pigs, dogs. Their blood spilled into the soil, seeping down into the earth, rising up to the heavens. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where dogs were buried with their masters, their lives given as companions for eternity. Blood sacrifice was not cruelty, but duty. A way to bind man to spirit, to sustain the dead, to please the gods. No civilization revered its ancestors as deeply as the Chinese. The living and the dead were bound together in an unbroken chain. At ancestral temples, the blood of oxen or sheep was poured into vessels. The spirits of forefathers were fed. The family was blessed. Even in private homes, a few drops of blood, a sacrifice of a chicken or pig, might be offered during the festivals. The ancestors, though invisible, remained present, and blood was the bridge. But the offerings did not end with animals. In the Shang dynasty, nearly 4,000 years ago, human sacrifice was common. Slaves, war captives, even servants, were killed and buried to accompany kings in death. At Inshu, the ruins of the Shang capital, archaeologists uncovered pits filled with headless corpses, bodies arranged with ritual precision, their blood spilled for the ancestors, their lives consumed by the mandate of heaven. To us, it may seem cruel, but to the Shang, it was necessity. The dead king required servants in the afterlife, and heaven required blood. With the Zhou dynasty, the mandate of heaven became doctrine. Ritual sacrifice was systematized. The king, as son of heaven, stood as mediator between man and cosmos. Here, blood sacrifice took on a solemn formality. Oxen were led to great altars, their throats cut, their blood collected in bronze vessels. The earth drank, the heavens accepted. The Book of Rites describes in detail how blood was offered at seasonal festivals, how the Son of Heaven bowed and prayed, how every cut of the knife was aligned with cosmic order. In later dynasties, the emperor himself became the high priest of the nation. At the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, the emperor offered sacrifices to heaven and earth. Oxen were slaughtered, their blood sprinkled upon the sacred altar. The ceremony was not merely religious. It was political. If the emperor performed the sacrifices correctly, the empire prospered. If not, heaven's mandate could be lost. Blood, then, was the very lifeline of imperial legitimacy. But beyond the palaces and temples, the common people too used blood in their rituals. Villagers smeared roosters' blood on doorways to drive away spirits. They cut their own fingers and mixed blood with wine, creating blood oaths that bound brotherhoods and secret societies. To swear in blood was to call upon heaven itself as witness. To break the oath was to invite heaven's wrath. Taoist priests, too, sometimes used blood in their rites. Petitions to the gods were signed not with ink, but with a drop of blood. It was life's seal, an unbreakable bond. Even talismans were written in blood. believed to carry unmatched power. In exorcisms, animal blood was sometimes sprinkled, driving out spirits and sealing boundaries. The blood of life, as the ultimate weapon against the forces of death. Over centuries, Confucian scholars condemned blood sacrifice as excessive. Buddhism and Taoism offered gentler alternatives. Vegetarian offerings, incense, symbolic rituals began to replace the spilling of blood. And yet, blood never vanished. In folk practice, the rooster's blood still marks doors. The oath in blood still seals bonds. And in hidden temples, some say sacrifices still occur. For the Chinese, blood was never simply violence. It was harmony. Heaven and earth were vast, distant, eternal. Man was small, fragile, temporary. But through blood, he could speak to heaven. He could feed the ancestors. He could keep the balance of the world intact. The ox bellows. The knife gleams. The emperor bows before the altar of heaven. A rooster crows, its blood dripping upon the threshold of a village home. A brother pricks his finger, pressing it into wine, and drinks, swearing eternal loyalty. In all these moments, blood is more than blood. It is the breath of life, offered to keep the world in order. A shrine in the forest. A torii gate, painted red, standing at the threshold. The wind moves through the branches, carrying the whispers of unseen spirits. Here, the kami dwell. And they hunger not for gold, nor incense, but for purity, reverence, and sometimes blood. In ancient Japan, religion was not a system of commandments, but a landscape of spirits. The kami, divine presences, lived in waterfalls, in rocks, in storms, in rice fields. They were not gods in the distant heavens, but immediate, near, woven into every element of nature. To honor the kami, offerings were made. Rice, sake, cloth, and, on rare, sacred occasions, blood. In Shinto belief, purity is life. Pollution is death. Blood, paradoxically, was both. Blood from wounds, menstruation, or death, was polluting. Unclean, dangerous, requiring rituals of cleansing. But blood offered in sacrifice, that was power. It was the force of life itself, given to sustain the kami. Thus, the Japanese saw blood as both peril and gift, a substance to fear, and yet to wield. In the earliest eras, archaeology suggests that animals were sacrificed to please the spirits of the land. Horses, oxen, boars. Their blood sprinkled upon the soil, dedicated to the kami of the harvest. In the Kojiki, Japan's ancient chronicle. We find hints of rituals where human blood was spilled to sanctify a site, to calm a restless spirit, to secure the favor of the divine. These offerings were rare, but they carried immense significance. Blood meant life. Life meant harmony. One of the most unsettling practices of ancient Japan was the ritual known as hitobashira, human pillars. When great bridges, castles, or dams were built, a person would sometimes be buried alive beneath the foundation. Their blood, their spirit, would become a guardian, ensuring the stability of the structure, warding off disaster. Legends tell of maidens or warriors offered as living sacrifices, their screams echoing beneath stone and timber, their souls bound forever to the edifice above. Even centuries later, villagers whispered that floods, collapses, and fires meant the kami were displeased, and another sacrifice might be required. As Japan entered the age of the samurai, blood gained new meaning. The warrior's life was an offering to his lord, to his clan, to the code of Bushido. Death was not pollution, but honor. The ritual of seppuku, cutting open one's belly, was both atonement and sacrifice. The spilling of one's own blood purified shame, appeased the ancestors, and sealed loyalty with death. Here, blood became not only religious, but existential. To die with honor was to join the ancestors proudly, to leave behind no stain of disgrace. Beyond the battlefield, blood forged bonds of loyalty. Samurai and outlaws alike sometimes cut their arms, mixing blood with sake, and drinking it together. This blood oath made them more than companions. It made them brothers, bound before the kami. Breaking such an oath was thought to bring not only dishonor, but spiritual ruin. While great blood sacrifices declined, as Shinto developed, traces endured in symbolic form. At shrines, roosters were offered, their blood spilled upon sacred ground. At certain festivals, the blood of animals was sprinkled to cleanse and protect villages. And in myth, blood remained central. From the drops of blood shed by the storm god Susanoo, to the tale of Izanagi and Izanami, where birth, death, and blood intertwine with creation itself. With the arrival of Buddhism, the role of blood shifted again. Buddhist monks preached compassion, condemning animal and human sacrifice. Yet even Buddhism absorbed the symbolism of blood. In esoteric sects, offerings of life essence, symbolic or real, were made to fierce deities. Thus, blood never vanished from Japanese ritual. It changed form. moving from literal sacrifice to symbolic gesture, from slaughter to oath, from human pillars to ritual wine. In Japanese folklore, spirits too thirst for blood. Ghosts, urei, sometimes seek vengeance through draining the life force of the living. Demons, oni, are painted with blood upon their fangs. And stories tell of restless spirits, appeased only when blood is spilled, to calm their fury. Here, again, we glimpse the deep duality. Blood as danger. Blood as offering. Blood as the coin of peace. To this day, the torii gates of shrines are painted red. The color of blood. The color of life. The color of protection. Every visitor who passes beneath, whether they know it or not, walks through the echo of sacrifice, through the shadow of offerings long past. A bridge stands across a rushing river. Beneath its stones, a life was buried. A samurai kneels, plunging the blade into his belly. His blood seeping into the ground. His soul ascending to his ancestors. A rooster crows at dawn. Its throat cut. Its blood poured upon the steps of a shrine. And a torii gate, red as living blood, stands eternal in the forest. A marker of the sacred. A reminder of the price once paid. For the Japanese, blood was never merely loss. Never merely pollution. It was life force. Sacrifice. Oath. And bond. It tied the mortal world to the spirits of the kami. It sealed loyalty stronger than stone. And it turned death itself into a passage of honor. High in the Andes, where clouds drift across snow-capped peaks, the Inca ruled an empire of stone and sky. To them, the world was alive with spirits. The mountains themselves were gods. The apis, watching over valleys and villages. And the Inca knew, to honor such powers, life must be given. Blood must flow. The most solemn of Inca sacrifices was the capacocha. Children, chosen for their beauty, purity, and lineage, were prepared for months, even years. They were fed the finest foods, clothed in rich garments, honored as living emissaries of the gods. Then, led in solemn procession to the high peaks, they were offered. Sometimes strangled. Sometimes given chicha, maize beer, until they slipped into sleep. Sometimes left to freeze, their blood stilled by the mountain winds. Their spirits were believed to join the gods of the Andes, bringing fertility, rain, and protection to the empire. Archaeologists have found their bodies preserved in ice, their faces peaceful, as if still dreaming, silent witnesses to a covenant of blood. Not only humans, but animals too, were bound in sacrifice. The llama, sacred beast of the Andes, was offered in countless rituals. Its blood spilled upon the earth. Its body buried in temple grounds. To feed Pachamama, the Earth Mother. The Inca believed the llama's cry at death was heard by the gods, a bridge between realms. Before the Inca, on the northern coast of Peru, flourished the Moche civilization. Their pyramids still rise from desert sands, painted with murals of warriors and sacrifice. The Moche drank blood. Captured enemies were slain, their throats cut, their blood collected in goblets, and offered to the gods. Priests, often women of high rank, presided over the rite. Blood was smeared upon idols, poured into the earth, lifted toward the sun. The Moche believed that blood nourished the divine, as water nourishes crops. Without it, the balance of the cosmos would wither. Further south, the Nazca carved immense geoglyphs into the desert, lines and figures, stretching for miles. Why they built them remains a mystery. But alongside these lines, archaeologists have found evidence of sacrifices, headless bodies, skulls placed in ritual fashion, blood spilled upon the dry earth. Perhaps the geoglyphs were maps for the gods, and the blood was the ink that consecrated them. Even earlier, the Chavan culture spoke the language of blood. At their great temple, priests used hallucinogens to enter trance, to speak with jaguar gods and serpent spirits. Blood offerings, human and animal alike, were part of this transformation. In sacrifice, the boundary between human and beast, between mortal and divine, was crossed. Beyond the Andes, blood rituals also lived in North America. Among the Plains peoples, the sun dance was the great rite of sacrifice. Dancers fasted for days, then pierced their skin with hooks tied to poles. They pulled, tearing flesh, offering their pain and blood to the Great Spirit. This was not death sacrifice, but living sacrifice, a gift of suffering, to renew the world, to pray for vision, to bind the people in unity. Here, blood was not spilled in silence, but in dance, in song, in the beating of drums. Beneath the wide sky, farther east, in the forests of Brazil, the Tupi peoples held a different vision. For them, the blood of enemies was the greatest offering. Captured warriors were kept, not as slaves, but as honored foes. Ceremonies ended with their death, their blood and flesh consumed. To drink the enemy's blood was to take his spirit, to gain his strength, to honor his courage. Thus, sacrifice was not only for the gods, but for the cycle of war, the bond between victor and vanquished. Across the Americas, a pattern emerges. Blood was the price of life. Blood was the coin of balance. From the children upon the Andean peaks, to the warriors upon Moche altars, to the dancers beneath the plains sun, all knew that blood was power. Not to waste, but to offer. To bleed was to give. To die was to transcend. And in that gift, the gods and the world were sustained. A child wrapped in bright cloth, laid gently upon a snowy peak. A priest raising a goblet, filled with the blood of the vanquished. A figure swaying in the desert, flesh torn, eyes lifted to the blazing sun. These visions are distant, yet they echo still. For wherever humanity has walked, the path of blood has followed. The Incas, the Moche, the Nazca, the Chavin, the Plains peoples, the Tupi. All different. All separated by mountains and oceans. And yet, all drawn to the same truth. That blood is the essence of life. And to give it is to touch the eternal. Long before temples of stone, the peoples of Canaan raised altars of rough rock, places to spill blood, to the gods of storm, of fertility, of fire and war. Baal, Lord of thunder. Molech, God of burning flame. Children were laid upon altars, their blood spilled as offering. To give the firstborn was to appease the powers that brought rain or drought, life or death. The cries of infants rose with the smoke, a chilling hymn to gods, whose favor was feared as much as it was sought. To the east, in the shadow of Babylon, blood carried yet another meaning. Here, sacrifice was tied to kingship. The ruler stood as the mediator between gods and men. The lamb, the ox, the dove, slain upon the altars of Ishtar and Marduk. The blood consecrated temples, sealed treaties, marked oaths. In Babylonian ritual, blood was not only gift, it was contract. To pour it upon the stones was to bind human and divine in unbreakable bond. And then emerged a new vision. Among the ancient Hebrews, blood became the very seal of covenant with the divine. Abraham, willing to offer his son Isaac, a test of faith that spoke to the ancient logic of blood. The lamb, slain at Passover. Its blood brushed upon the doors, to protect from the angel of death. The temple in Jerusalem, its altar ran red with the blood of bulls and goats, offered in atonement for sin, to cleanse the people before their God. Here, blood was no longer for many gods, but for one. The sacrifice shifted from terror to covenant, an unbroken chain between God and his people. Blood also marked power. Kings were anointed with oil, yet their reigns were sealed with blood. Through conquest, through oaths, through ritual. Prophets, too, spoke of blood. They condemned the excess of sacrifice, saying that justice and mercy were higher offerings than the slaughter of beasts. Yet the memory remained that blood had bound the people, that it had been the price of forgiveness and survival. In the deserts of Arabia, before the rise of Islam, tribes poured out blood to gods of stone and star. The Kaaba itself, in its earliest days, was said to witness sacrifice. Blood consecrated sacred ground, marking it as a place where heaven touched earth. Even here, in shifting sands, blood was the language by which humans spoke to the unseen. The Middle East gave birth to the great monotheisms: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Each inherited the memory of blood, but reinterpreted it. For Christians, the crucifixion became the ultimate sacrifice. Blood shed once for all. For Muslims, the spilling of blood in ritual slaughter became remembrance, obedience, and sustenance shared with the poor. The old altars faded. The gods of fire and stone fell silent. Yet the red thread remained. Blood as covenant. Blood as gift. Blood as the line between mortal and divine. Imagine the scene. A stone altar, rough and darkened by countless offerings. The cries of animals, the chanting of priests, the rising smoke that coils into the desert sky. Or a family in Egypt, marking their door with lamb's blood, hearts pounding with fear and hope. Or a king of Babylon, raising a cup filled with crimson, swearing oath to the gods of his city. The Middle East is a tapestry, woven with blood, not only in war, but in devotion, in covenant, in longing for the eternal. The sands remember. The stones remember. Every temple, every altar, every drop spilled upon sacred ground, is part of a long, unbroken chain. The prophets thundered against it. The kings wielded it. The people depended on it. And though today, The altars stand silent. Their ghosts whisper still. For in the Middle East, perhaps more than anywhere else, blood was not only ritual. It was identity. It was covenant. It was destiny. At the heart of medieval Christianity was a paradox. The belief that salvation came through the shedding of blood. The crucifixion of Christ. His body broken. His blood spilled. Became the central mystery of faith. The Eucharist, celebrated in vast cathedrals and humble chapels, was the reenactment of this sacrifice. The bread became body. The wine became blood. To drink from the chalice was to partake in the divine. It was both comfort and terror. For to consume holy blood was to bind oneself to the eternal covenant. Legends grew of relics. The Holy Grail, which caught the blood of Christ upon the cross. The Holy Lance, that pierced his side. And the shroud, bearing the imprint of his wounded form. Knights and pilgrims journeyed across continents. To glimpse, to touch, to venerate these sacred vessels of blood. But blood was not only sacred in chalices. It was poured out in torrents. On the battlefields of the Crusades, the cry went out. Deus vult, God wills it. Knights crossed oceans, swords in hand, to reclaim the Holy Land. They slaughtered in the name of Christ. Their own blood shed in return. Chroniclers wrote of rivers running red in Jerusalem's streets. To die in battle, it was said, was to be washed in the blood of Christ himself. Faith and violence became inseparable. Every drop spilled was claimed for God, for church, for salvation. Within Europe, another stream of blood flowed. The martyrs, those who died rather than renounce their faith, were revered. Their wounds became holy relics. Their stories told in whispers. The cult of saints spread. Their blood believed to heal, to bless, to guard against evil. Pilgrims traveled far to see vials of blood, kept in jeweled reliquaries, displayed upon holy days, as proof of miracles. The blood of the faithful became both symbol and substance, binding heaven and earth, in flesh and crimson. Yet alongside reverence came fear. The Church, guarding its authority, turned its gaze upon those it deemed impure. Heretics, who dared to question doctrine. Mystics, whose vision strayed from orthodoxy. And women, often healers, midwives, or outsiders, accused of witchcraft. The Inquisition rose like a shadow, pulling thousands into its grasp. Confessions were drawn from blood, through torture, through pain, through fire. And when the condemned were executed, their blood ran as warning. Each drop, a crimson marker of the Church's power. The cry of witches, burning at the stake, mingled with the prayers of priests, creating a chorus both holy and terrible. In the dim chambers of monasteries, another form of blood ritual unfolded. Bloodletting. Leeches, knives, and cups drew forth the crimson tide, to heal the sick, to balance the humors, to purge sin from flesh. Doctors and monks believed that illness was imbalance, and blood the key to restoration. The body was drained, so that the soul might live. Even here, the logic of blood, as sacrifice, as healing, as bridge between life and death, remained unbroken. In every village, in every cathedral, the people lived in the shadow of blood. At Mass, they drank of Christ's blood. At war, they spilled the blood of enemies. At trial, they watched the blood of the condemned flow. In sickness, their own blood was drawn in hope of cure. It was everywhere. Sacred, feared, necessary. To live in the Middle Ages was to live within an endless river of blood, flowing from chalice, from sword, from wound, from flame. And so the Middle Ages remembered its chronicles, its legends, its stained glass windows and illuminated manuscripts. All spoke of blood. The blood of Christ, offered as eternal salvation. The blood of martyrs, sanctifying the earth. The blood of witches and heretics, spilled in fear and judgment. A paradox eternal. Blood as life. Blood as death. Blood as sacred mystery. Europe's stones still remember. In the ruins of abbeys. In the battlefields. In the towns where women once burned. The echo remains. For the Middle Ages was an age, written in crimson, sealed in faith, and haunted forever by the blood that flowed. The 15th and 16th centuries were drenched in suspicion. The witch hunts began, no longer confined to whispers in villages. The fear of witches spread across courts, kingdoms, and entire continents. Blood was the evidence most feared. Marks upon the body, birthmarks, scars, or blemishes, were called the devil's seal. Women accused of witchcraft were stripped, searched, their flesh scrutinized for signs that demons had tasted their blood. Confessions, extracted through torture, spoke of rituals in which witches sacrificed animals, sometimes children, offering blood to the devil. whether real or imagined. These accusations painted a vision of hidden Sabbaths, where fires blazed, and witches cut themselves to write their names in blood. In the black book of hell, blood became contract. Blood became proof. Blood became fear itself. But in shadowed studies, another current flowed. The alchemists, men who searched for the philosopher's stone, for the elixir of life, for the secret fire of transformation. For them, blood was not sin, but substance. They saw in it the mystery of the cosmos. Blood contained life, and life, they believed, could be transmuted, perfected, made eternal. Manuscripts spoke of the red tincture, the essence of blood, as the key to turning base metals into gold. Some alchemists even experimented with human blood, believing it to be the purest matter of all. To drink blood, to distill it, to burn it in crucibles, was to court immortality. Where the church saw blasphemy, the alchemists saw hidden truth. Where the priest raised a chalice, the alchemist raised a flask. Both were filled with red. Both promised life. But only one was sanctioned. Beyond alchemists and witches, the Renaissance and early modern world birthed new orders, hidden brotherhoods, secret cults, the Rosicrucians, the whispers of Freemasons, magicians in velvet chambers, drawing sigils on floors, speaking invocations, and sealing pacts with drops of blood. Blood was signature. Blood was covenant. To cut one's hand, and let it drip upon parchment, was to seal a vow stronger than ink. Occult grimoires described how to summon angels, how to bind demons, how to heal, how to curse. Always, blood was the offering, the thread that tied spirit to flesh. It was believed that spirits could not act in this world without a medium. Blood, warm and living, was that bridge. And so in candlelit rooms, men and women carved their flesh, not in sacrifice to gods, but in pursuit of power, knowledge, and forbidden communion. For common folk, the fear of blood rituals only deepened. Villages whispered of witches who stole children in the night to drink their blood. Tales spread of vampires, creatures neither living nor dead, who fed upon the blood of the innocent. These stories, half superstition, half accusation, were fueled by real terror. Disease, plague, and sudden death that seemed to drain life itself from the body. When corpses were exhumed, blood found at the mouth was seen as proof of vampirism. The dead were staked, decapitated, burned, their blood spilled to stop their hunger. Here the medieval fear of witches merged with a new dread. The night stalker, the blood drinker, the unseen predator in the dark. Even as superstition grew, so too did science. Doctors of the Renaissance began to study the body in earnest. Anatomists dissected cadavers, watching how blood coursed through veins. By the 17th century, William Harvey would discover the circulation of blood, a truth hidden since antiquity. But before such enlightenment, blood remained mysterious. Transfusions were attempted, first with animals, later with men. Blood was poured from one body to another, with mixed and often deadly results. Still, beneath the fear and the failures, a deeper understanding stirred. Blood was no longer only spiritual. It was physical, mechanical, real. The line between medicine and ritual, between alchemy and science, blurred in crimson experiment. And yet, even as knowledge grew, the shadows did not vanish. The church still hunted witches, their trials filling courts with blood. Alchemists continued to whisper of elixirs. Occultists still cut their flesh, to sign their names in hidden pacts. Europe, now entering its so-called age of reason, still pulsed with superstition, still throbbed with fear, still circled endlessly around the mystery of blood. What remains of these centuries of whispers? In the myths of vampires that still haunt literature, in the secret societies that still claim ancient blood oaths, in the laboratory where the study of blood became the science of life itself. The shadow and the light never parted ways. Instead they danced together. Alchemy and medicine, witchcraft and science, fear and curiosity, all joined by blood. For in the shadows of witchcraft, alchemy, and the occult, blood was never merely liquid. It was the essence of power, the pulse of the hidden, the red thread that wove together terror, desire, and forbidden knowledge. And still, in the flicker of candlelight, if you listen closely, the whisper lingers. Blood is the key. Blood is the price. Blood is the mystery eternal. The candles gutter, and the whispering shadows of alchemists and witches fade into the trembling dawn of a new age. The Enlightenment rises. The world begins to speak of reason, of progress, of knowledge not hidden but shared. And yet, even as philosophers write of liberty, and scientists map the stars, the old current flows on. Blood still shapes destiny. Blood still writes history. But now, it is not only the blood of sacrifice, not only the blood of ritual. It is the blood of nations, the blood of revolution, the blood that would baptize a new and restless world. And so begins the Enlightenment promised light, reason, freedom from superstition. In the laboratories of Europe, the mystery of blood was finally unveiled. William Harvey's discovery of the circulation of blood in the 17th century had shaken the old world, proving that the body was a system, a living machine. Doctors and philosophers now saw blood not as magic, but as matter. They studied it, measured it, drained it, transfused it. Bloodletting persisted, believed to balance humors, to cure illness, to keep the body in order. And though the practice would later be questioned, it reflected the same idea that had haunted humanity since the beginning, that blood was life, and life could be controlled. But outside the laboratory, blood carried new meanings. The philosophers of the Enlightenment spoke of liberty, equality, fraternity, of the shared humanity of all men. Blood became a symbol of brotherhood. All bled the same. All were human. All carried the same red essence within them. Yet as always, blood was both symbol and substance. And soon the rhetoric of equality would meet the reality of revolution. France. The year is 1789. The storming of the Bastille. The streets of Paris erupt. The revolution begins. Blood flows. Not in ritual sacrifice, but in the execution of kings. The guillotine becomes the altar of a new age. Crowds gather to watch as the blade falls, as the blood of Louis XVI, and later Marie Antoinette, darkens the wood. It is a sacrifice not to gods, but to ideals, to liberty, to the people, to the future. The Enlightenment had promised reason, but its child, the Revolution, was baptized in blood. And not only in France. Across Europe, revolution stirred. The old order crumbled. Thrones toppled. Crowns fell. In each upheaval, blood was spilled. The lifeblood of kings. The lifeblood of peasants. Mingling on the ground. In the name of freedom. Across the ocean. In the New World. Another revolution unfolded. The American colonies, driven by Enlightenment ideals, rose against the British Crown. Here too, blood marked the birth of a nation. Battles at Lexington, Concord, Yorktown, fields soaked with blood. The Declaration of Independence was signed not in ink alone, but sealed by the blood of those who fought to defend it. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Words enshrined in the Enlightenment's glow, but secured only through sacrifice. Yet even as philosophers spoke of equality, the world remained divided. Empires expanded. Colonial powers carved up Africa, Asia, the Americas. Blood was spilled in conquest, in the name of commerce, of civilization, of empire. Millions of enslaved Africans were carried across the seas. The Middle Passage, a trail of blood and salt, where countless lives ended. In the depths of the ocean, their blood, their labor, their suffering, became the hidden foundation of modern wealth. The Enlightenment spoke of reason, but the ship spoke of chains. In France, the revolution deepened. The guillotine worked day and night. The reign of terror claimed thousands. Blood ran through the streets of Paris, until the gutters could not carry it away. Yet still, the leaders spoke of reason, of justice, of the Enlightenment. It was as if blood itself was now the price of progress, the toll demanded for liberty to be born. As politics turned crimson, science continued its march. Experiments in blood transfusion were refined. Chemists studied the components of blood. Microscopes revealed its hidden forms. The mysteries of circulation, oxygen, and respiration were slowly uncovered. And yet, beneath this rational progress, the old fascination lingered. Blood remained not just science, but symbol. It was written into the constitutions, the anthems, the songs of revolution. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Even in an age of reason, blood was the seal, the proof, the offering. As the 18th century closed, the world stood changed. The Enlightenment had shattered the old order. It had declared that reason, not superstition, must guide mankind. And yet, the path it carved was not clean. Blood soaked the ground of Europe, of the Americas, of colonies across the seas. For in this new age, blood no longer belonged to temples or gods. It belonged to nations, to revolutions, to the dream of liberty. The sacrifices had shifted, but the red price remained. And so, as the Enlightenment waned, the world stood at the edge of a new fire. The 19th century loomed. Empires rose and fell. Nations bled to be born. Wars thundered across continents. And always, beneath the drums of reason and progress, the same eternal rhythm pulsed. The rhythm of blood. The red dawn of the 19th century creeps across the world. The Enlightenment has burned its bright fire. But in its place comes a new age. An age of empire. Of machines. Of industry. The old thrones of Europe still tremble from revolution. The guillotine's shadow has faded, but not the memory of its edge. Now, blood flows not only in the name of liberty, but in the name of progress, in the name of empire, in the name of machines that roar louder than thunder. And so begins. The century opens with turmoil. The Napoleonic Wars sweep across Europe. A storm of conquest. At Austerlitz, Waterloo, Borodino, fields are drenched with blood. Millions fall. Armies march like iron tides. And the soil of Europe drinks deep of sacrifice. These are no sacred offerings. No gifts for gods. They are the blood price of ambition. The blood cost of empire. And yet, from this sea of crimson, new nations are forged. Borders are redrawn. The map of Europe itself is reshaped by blood. Beyond Europe, empires expand. The British, their flag carried by ships and muskets, stretch their reach across the globe. India, Africa, the Caribbean. Lands pulled beneath the crown. But empire is not only gold and trade. It is conquest. It is rebellion. It is the crack of the whip. And the stain of blood on colonial soil. In India, rebellions flare. The Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 erupts. A storm of rage and resistance. Streets run red. British reprisals fall heavy. Blood becomes both bond and boundary. The mark of who rules. And who suffers beneath rule. In Africa, tribes clash with rifles and cannons. Ancient kingdoms fall. The ground itself darkens. With the mingled blood of conqueror and conquered. Empire drinks deep. Industry grows fat on its crimson harvest. Meanwhile, at home in Europe and America, the Industrial Revolution transforms the world. The factory replaces the field. The machine replaces the hand. Steam hisses. Engines roar. And men, women, and children are fed into the furnaces of labor. Not sacrificed to gods, but to industry. Their sweat, their exhaustion, their broken bodies, their blood spilled in accidents of steel and coal, all fuel the new age. Progress is written in iron. But iron is always bought with blood. Though Enlightenment philosophers had spoken of equality, Slavery still thrived. The transatlantic slave trade officially ended in the early 19th century. Yet its shadow stretched on. In the plantations of the Americas, in the cotton fields of the South, blood watered the ground. The labor of enslaved Africans fed the hunger of industry. The Civil War erupted in the United States. Brother against brother. Nation divided. More than 600,000 dead. A tide of blood so vast that it reshaped the nation itself. Slavery ended. But freedom was baptized in sacrifice. Throughout the 19th century, revolutions shook the world. In 1848, the Year of Revolutions, uprisings erupted across Europe. Peasants, workers, and intellectuals rose against kings and empires. The streets of Paris, Berlin, Vienna, all ran red. Barricades of stone and fire were built and torn down with blood. Though many of these revolutions failed, they lit sparks that would one day ignite the future. And still, science marched forward. The 19th century was a turning point in medicine. Blood transfusions advanced. Microscopes revealed the tiny cells within blood. Doctors began to understand infection, sterilization, the mysteries of disease. Joseph Lister brought antiseptics. Louis Pasteur uncovered the germ theory. Blood, once mystical, was now a battleground of science. And yet, the symbolism endured. Blood was still life, still sacrifice, still the price of survival. Hospitals became new temples of blood, where the sick were drained, cut, stitched, bled, not to appease gods, but to preserve life itself. Beyond science, blood entered art, literature, and imagination. The Romantics, haunted by death and beauty, spoke of crimson passion, of wounds of love, of the blood that binds souls. Mary Shelley wrote of Frankenstein, a creation stitched from bodies, a reflection of science and horror. Bram Stoker's Dracula emerged at the century's end, turning blood into obsession. The vampire drank not just life, but desire, power, immortality. In fiction and poetry, blood became both terror and ecstasy, a shadow beneath the progress of reason. By the end of the century, the world was transformed. Nations had risen and fallen. Empires stretched across oceans. Machines thundered. Science advanced. Literature dreamed of monsters. But always, beneath it all, was the same eternal truth. Every empire was built on blood. Every industry demanded its sacrifice. Every revolution, every nation, was baptized in red. The 19th century was an age of progress. But it was also an age of sacrifice. A century that claimed to leave behind the superstitions of old, yet spilled more blood than many ages before it. And so, as the century waned, a new darkness gathered. The 20th century waited just beyond the horizon. Its wars would be greater, its machines deadlier, its rivers of blood deeper still. For in the age to come, humanity would perfect the machinery of death. The altar would not be stone, but steel and fire. The offering would not be animals, nor kings, but entire nations. The world was about to drown in blood. The air grows heavy. The 19th century fades, its machines still roaring, its empires still stretching, its nations still trembling. But ahead, beyond the veil of time, a shadow descends. A shadow so vast, so consuming, that it will turn the world itself into a battlefield. And so begins. In 1914, a gunshot in Sarajevo. A single moment. A single spark. And the old world ignites. Empires clash. Alliances fracture. And soon, the entire world is at war. The Great War. They call it the war to end all wars. But it is only the beginning. Trenches carved through Europe. Lines of mud and death. Soldiers stand knee-deep in filth and blood, their faces shadowed by gas masks. Machine guns chatter. Artillery shakes the earth. Poison gas drifts like a pale green fog. Searing lungs. Burning eyes. Leaving fields littered with the still and the silent. At Verdun. At the Somme. Rivers of blood spill into rivers of mud. Men vanish in the churn of steel and fire. The world learns that industry and empire can slaughter not thousands, but millions. And when the smoke clears, 10 million are dead. The soil of Europe has drunk deeper than ever before. But the war is not the only tide. In Russia, 1917, revolution erupts. The Tsar falls. The old empire collapses. And blood stains the palaces of the Romanovs. The Bolsheviks rise. Civil war spreads like fire. Brother turns upon brother. Village upon village. Until the snow itself runs red. A new empire is born. An empire of ideology. But its birth, like all empires, is paid in blood. The Great War ends. But peace is fragile. The victors carve borders, impose debts, declare a false dawn. But beneath the surface, resentment stirs. The soil is too rich with blood to yield peace. New tyrants rise. New ideologies take root. The promise of progress is drowned in cries for revenge. The world does not heal. It only prepares. The storm breaks again. This time, not just Europe, but the world entire is consumed. Nazi Germany, its banners blood red, marches across nations. The swastika spreads like fire. Cities burn. Armies fall. And behind the front lines, a darker sacrifice. The Holocaust. A blood ritual of cruelty. Systematic and unrelenting. Millions herded into camps. Gas chambers. Furnaces. Bloodless. Yet more horrific than any altar of old. The very idea of humanity. Bled to the bone. In Asia, Japan wages war. The rape of Nanjing. Streets run with blood. As soldiers carve terror into the earth. Pearl Harbor shatters the Pacific. The tide spreads. Ocean to ocean. The world itself becomes an altar. Everywhere. The sacrifice mounts. At Stalingrad. Armies clash in fire and ruin. The Volga runs red. Winter freezes the fallen into grotesque statues of sacrifice. At Normandy, waves of soldiers charge into death. Sand and sea alike painted crimson. At Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a new ritual. Not of blades, not of fire, but of the atom. In a single flash, blood turns to shadow. Cities vanish in a storm of light. This, too, is sacrifice. Not to gods, but to power, to victory, to fear. When it ends, in 1945, the world is changed forever. More than 70 million dead. The greatest sacrifice in all of history. Nations broken. Empires dissolved. Borders redrawn in ash and blood. The war gave birth to the United Nations. To cries of never again. And yet, beneath the surface, the same current flows. For humanity has always known. To build a new world, blood must be spilled. Peace comes, but not truly. The Cold War begins. An age of shadow sacrifice. Proxy wars. Insurgencies. Revolutions. Korea. Vietnam. Afghanistan. The world divides. East against West. And though nuclear fire remains sheathed, The blood flows still, quietly, endlessly. In jungles and deserts. In silent graves. The 20th century was an age of blood without measure. The altar was no longer a temple, but a factory, a trench, a battlefield, a camp. The sacrifices were no longer kings or chosen few, but millions upon millions. Ordinary men and women, consumed by the machinery of war and ideology. It was an age where blood itself became statistics, numbers too vast for comprehension. An age where the sacredness of life was drowned in the efficiency of death. And yet, still, beneath the horror, the ancient truth remained. Blood is the foundation. Blood is the price. Blood is the thread that binds history together. As the century closed, the world looked forward to progress, to technology, to peace. But in truth, the shadow of sacrifice has never left. For even now, in the 21st century, blood rituals remain, not in temples of stone, but in streets, in wars, in the quiet offerings of violence that humankind continues to demand. And so, the story of blood is not yet done. It flows onward, through us, within us, forever. The century turns. The clock strikes midnight. The 20th fades. Its oceans of blood, still glistening in memory. And yet, the 21st begins. Not with peace, but with fire. A new millennium. A new chapter. The same red tide. Morning in America. Clear skies. Calm air. And then, a sudden rupture. Plains become daggers. Towers become pyres. The sky itself bleeds smoke and fire. Nearly 3,000 lives. In an instant. Consumed. Not on an altar of stone, but in the heart of a modern city. A ritual of terror. A sacrifice broadcast to the entire world. The 21st century begins with blood. The response is swift. The war on terror begins. Afghanistan. Iraq. Nations torn open. Their soil soaked red. In deserts and mountains. In villages and cities. The sacrifice spreads. Drones hum overhead. Bombs fall in silence. Then thunder. Families vanish. Names forgotten. But their blood remains. What was once called crusade or conquest now wears the language of freedom and security. But the truth is ancient. Blood still oils the gears of empire. The old gods return. In new forms. Extremists raise black flags. They chant. They invoke. They demand blood. The Islamic State, the Caliphate reborn, builds its reign upon sacrifice. Beheadings filmed like theater. Suicide bombings turned to ritual. Terror as ceremony. But in truth, this is nothing new. It is the same old hunger, draped in modern banners. Not all sacrifice comes from war. In cities across the world, streets run red in other ways. Mass shootings in schools and malls. Protests that spiral into violence. Police and people clashing. Tearing at each other. The ground between them darkened with blood. Even in peace, the ritual continues. Even in prosperity, the sacrifice is demanded. Then, a different kind of sacrifice. The world halts. A virus spreads. Silent and unseen. Not blades. Not bombs. But breath itself becomes the altar. Hospitals overflow. Bodies are counted by the thousands. Then by the millions. Nations mourn. Families are torn apart. The modern world discovers that blood need not flow in rivers to stain an age. Even in silence, the offering is made. The 21st century is not only war and plague. It is also transformation. Science advances. Technology grows. But even here, blood is present. Genetic research. Stem cells. Blood as data. Blood as medicine. What once was poured upon altars is now drawn into vials, studied beneath microscopes. Sacrifice becomes science. But the reverence remains. We still whisper. In blood lies life. In blood lies truth. And in another realm, our stories, our screens, our games. We consume blood as spectacle. Films bathe us in crimson. Games reward us in violence. Horror, war, crime. Rituals of the imagination. What was once sacred terror is now entertainment. Yet even here, it holds us. We are drawn to blood. We cannot look away. Across the globe, people rise. The Arab Spring. Hong Kong. Ukraine. Streets filled with cries. With flags. With fire. And when words fail, blood answers. Tear gas and bullets. Broken bodies. Sacrifices for freedom. For justice. For a future. As it was in ancient times, so it is now. The blood of martyrs waters the roots of change. We stand in the 21st century, Our temples are glass and steel. Our gods are nations, ideologies, prophets, dreams. But still, blood is offered. Not always by choice. Not always by ritual knife. But always. In war. In terror. In disease. In the quiet violence of society itself. The modern world believes itself enlightened. Rational. Free from ancient superstition. And yet, beneath the surface, the same current flows. Blood is still the price. Blood is still the foundation. The ritual never ended. It only changed its mask. And so, as we look upon our world, upon its cities, its wars, its fears, its dreams, we begin to see clearly. The story of blood is not past. It is present. It is eternal. And now, we move toward the end of our journey. Toward reflection. Toward the meaning of it all. The journey has brought us across millennia. From caves lit by flickering firelight, to temples of gold and stone, to the steel and glass towers of today. We have watched sacrifices upon altars. We have walked through battlefields. We have seen kings and prophets bleed. We have seen the anonymous masses vanish into history. And yet, the story does not end. Because blood is eternal. What is blood, truly? A crimson thread. A river of iron and salt. A current flowing within each of us. It is at once simple and divine. To the ancients, blood was life. It was spirit. It was the very breath of the gods. And even today, we whisper the same. Blood is thicker than water. Bloodlines. Blood bonds. We speak of it in family. In loyalty. In love and betrayal. We wear it as identity. We trace it as heritage. We spill it for nations. For faiths. For causes. Blood, as symbol, has never faded. It only deepened. But with every symbol comes a shadow. Blood is also terror. It is violence. It is sacrifice demanded. It stains our hands. It marks our wars. It haunts our memories. The shadow of blood is fear. The knowledge that life is fragile. That death is near. That the price of existence is always written in red. It lingers in nightmares. It follows us in whispers.